I'm filling in at this point for Rachel Smith, who is our chair. So in the spirit of Zoom and versatility and flexibility, I am pinch hitting here. What we're going to do is I will have her come back in a second to help host this and run this, because she's the one who has the handle and the expertise on the topic. But without further ado, what I thought I would do at this point is go ahead and have Katrina Rexing introduce her paper and go ahead and start her paper. And then what I will do is bring in our host while I'm doing that. So Katrina, go ahead and tell us your paper's title and go ahead and get started. Thank you.
My paper is titled Pagan Ritual, Demons, and Witchcraft: Transformation Throughout the Middle Ages, circa 500 AD to circa 1500 AD. References to witchcraft or accusations of such practices typically bring forth images of flying women, cauldrons of potions, animal familiars, and naked dances under a full moon. Well-known reactions against accused witches and their activities have included the Salem witch trials, Protestants and Catholics alike burning accused witches at the stake, and Christian sermons against magic, devil worship, and witches' Sabbaths. Medieval historians Norman Cohn, Richard Kiekeffer, Hans-Peter Brodel, and Michael D. Bailey have argued in recent years that witchcraft did not fully emerge until the 14th or 15th centuries, that it was invented by the Roman Catholic clergy, such as Inquisitors Heinrich Kramer, Jacob Springer, and Popes Innocent VIII and Gregory IX, and even that it never existed at all. The assertion that medieval witchcraft was a social construct created by papal inquisitors, however, is simply not supported by their surviving primary sources. The Canon Episcopi from Gratian's Decretum, circa 906 AD, warned that the perceived threats posed by witchcraft might in fact exist as a physical reality, if only through a dangerous conviction brought on by satanic influence exerted upon those who were weak in their Christian faith. Gregory IX's papal bull, Vox in Rama, 1233 AD, promoted both acknowledgement and condemnation of the diabolical practices associated with medieval witchcraft. Inquisitions against heretical witchcraft began in the 12th century, and at least a few individual witchcraft trials took place, though it was not until the 15th century, after Innocent VIII's papal bull Summis Desiderationes Effectibus, 1484, that local ecclesiastical authorities and inquisitors collaborated in legislating, investigating, and trying accused cases of witchcraft more widely. Admittedly, a significant increase in witch trials resulted after the powerful combination of Innocent VIII's papal bull and Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Springer's treatise Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches, circa 1486 to 1487. Such growth continued into the early modern period as inquisitors and ecclesiastical and secular authorities collaborated to end this perceived threat to Christendom, though this apparent increase may also be due in part to the higher survival rate of papal and inquisitorial documents during the later Middle Ages and early modern period. Thus, the extant evidence strongly suggests a gradual and widespread popular and clerical acknowledgement of the existence and practice of witchcraft during the Middle Ages. Such beliefs and practices were strongly rebuked by the Roman Catholic clergy long before the 15th century, when they marked the beginning of numerous witch trials in the later Middle Ages. Christianity, from its very birth, opposed sorcery and denounced it as evil and anti-Christian. Christians adapted the Hebrew Bible into their Old Testament. Therefore, even in the Apostolic Church, Christian opposition was crystal clear. Christians rejected magic, paganism, and sorcery, even when Christianity was underground in the Roman Empire. With Justin Martyr's Second Apology, circa 150 to 157 AD, emphasizing belief that such practices originated with demons. Quote, "They, the fallen angels, afterwards subdued the human race to themselves, partially by magical writings, partially by fears and punishments they occasioned, and partially by teaching them to offer sacrifices, incense, and libations," end quote. After its legalization in the 4th century, Christianity spread throughout Europe as its dominant religious faith especially amongst the Germanic tribes. Christians emphasized and taught biblical passages such as Acts 8, verses 9 through 24, in which the apostles Peter and John, along with Philip the evangelist, condemn a newly baptized magician who attempts to bribe them into providing him with the power of the Holy Spirit. Additionally, the writings of St. Augustine of Hippo, such as De Doctrina Christiana, completed in 426 AD, strongly opposed the observances of the occult amongst newly converted peoples. Thus, as Christianity spread, Christian leaders attempted to denounce the continued practice of magic and pagan rituals pre-existing in new converts' cultures, but such efforts were often unsuccessful. Therefore, despite the adamance of figures such as Augustine of Hippo, pagan practices involving magic and sorcery died away slowly, while church theologians continued to condemn them for centuries. During the early Middle Ages, circa 500 to 1000 AD, concern over pagan ritual combined with worries over sorcery. Historian of late antiquity, Peter Brown, believes evidence of witchcraft first emerged by the end of the 6th century in the European Mediterranean. Quote, "We meet the witch in the full sense, a person who is either born with or achieves an inherent character of evil. In this case, it is not an unconscious mystical quality. It is gained by a conscious act. But the power is gained by binding compact with the ultimate pole of evil, the devil," end quote. A fundamental shift took place. Throughout antiquity, witchcraft practiced by intellectual pagans could be redeemed simply by abandoning the demons and their practices and in their place receiving Christian baptism. Yet, by the late 6th century, when virtually all Western European and Byzantine society had been Christianized, witches were regarded as Christians who either had been born evil or else had rejected Christian teaching to make an irredeemable pact with Satan. In Northern Europe, evidence of popular belief in witchcraft was further confirmed in circa 906 AD with the Canon Episcopi, attributed to Reginald of Prüm, which argued that the rumored possibility of witchcraft's physical manifestation was a dangerous illusion created by the devil, who preyed on those who were weak in faith. Quote, "It is also not to be omitted that some wicked women who had given themselves back to Satan and been seduced by the illusions and phantasms of demons believe and profess that, in the hours of night, they ride upon certain beasts with Diana, the goddess of pagans, and are summoned to her service on certain nights. Whoever believes such things or things similar to these loses the faith. And he who has not the right faith in God is not of God, but of him in whom he believes, that is, of the devil," end quote. In addition to the suggestion here of the satanic deception of the believer, another clear inference is that belief in the real practice of witchcraft was widespread. With Europe's rebirth in the High Middle Ages, circa 1000 to 1300 AD, concern over pagan ritual died down, and in its place, heightened fears of diabolical witchcraft and sorcery arose. Roman Catholic theologians such as Burchard of Worms, 965 to 1025 AD, and corrector Hugh of St. Victor, 1096 to 1141 AD in Didaskalikon, and John of Salisbury, 1120 to 1180 in Polycraticus, condemned those who still practice pagan ritual. However, these criticisms were replaced with the acknowledgement of the practice of witchcraft as a physical reality in the 13th century through Gregory IX's Vox in Rama, 1233 AD. Quote, "The novice kisses him, a demon, and feels cold, like ice. After the kiss, the memory of the Catholic faith totally disappears from his heart. They even receive the body of our Lord every year at Easter from the hand of a priest, and carrying it in their mouths to their homes, they throw it in the latrine in contempt of the Savior. These wretches also believe in him, Lucifer, and affirm that he is the creator of heaven and will return there in his glory when the Lord has fallen," end quote. St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae, circa 1265 to 1274 AD, heightened popular belief in the devil's power and strengthened convictions that witchcraft was a reality, proclaiming, quote, "All divination by invoking demons is unlawful," end quote. The High Middle Ages ended with widespread acknowledgement of the reality of corporeal witchcraft. While Christendom was growing increasingly concerned with witchcraft, however, this fear had not yet culminated in the widespread persecution seen in the later Middle Ages, circa 1300 to 1500. Late medieval documents on witchcraft survive in greater numbers than any other time. This period finally saw numerous accused practitioners of witchcraft tried and many executed for their crimes. Claude Thollison's Ut Magorium et Maleficorium Errores, 1436 to 1437, provides the first concrete and firsthand evidence of witchcraft trials in large numbers in medieval Europe. Johannes Nieder's Formicarius, 1435 to 1438, also was highly influential in spreading witchcraft details throughout Europe. However, the most important to witch persecutions was Pope Innocent VIII's 1484 papal bull, Summis Deserterantes Effectubis. This promulgation and circulation of this bull led to dramatic increases in witchcraft trials at the end of the later Middle Ages. The Pope ended all loopholes that heretofore had allowed local ecclesiastical authorities to obstruct medieval inquisitors from conducting investigations and prosecutions in their regions. Summis Deserterantes Effectubis affirms, quote, "It shall be permitted that the said inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Springer, in these regions to exercise their office of inquisition and to proceed to the correction, imprisonment, and punishment of the aforesaid persons for their said offenses and crimes," end quote. Kramer and Springer's Malleus Maleficarum, circa 1486 to 1487, provided a convenient and detailed treatise on witches and how to prosecute them. Quote, "It should first be noted that while the sorceresses appear in three kinds, those who harm but are unable to heal, those who cure but do not harm as a result of a particular agreement entered into with a demon, and those who harm and heal, among those who harm, one kind is supreme, and those who belong to this kind are able to commit all the acts of sorcery," end quote. Thus, medieval witchcraft evolved from whispers of witches to acceptance of their physical reality, to the papally approved and promoted documents Summis Deserterantes Effectubis and the Malleus Maleficarum. Hence, Europe entered the early modern period, circa 1500 to 1800, prepared and willing to end all witchcraft cases throughout Christendom, no matter the cost. The increase of quality primary sources in the later Middle Ages has led modern historians to draw inaccurate conclusions about witchcraft. Michael D. Bailey argued that witchcraft did not fully develop until the early 15th century, while Richard Kiecheffer believes European witchcraft in the 14th and 15th centuries reflected a dangerous popular belief in its reality that hinged on, quote, "idolatry and apostasy," end quote. Norman Cohn and Hans Peter Brodel both heavily attribute the phenomena of witchcraft to invention or exaggeration by papal inquisitors. Such historians completely ignore the process that led to this acknowledgement, which took centuries, beginning with witchcraft denial from Roman Catholic and temporal authorities through the Canon Episcopi circa 906 AD. The denial then progressed into a slow and gradual admission of witchcraft for several more centuries, as shown by the start of inquisitions against heresy in the 12th century, which included individual heretical witchcraft cases. Finally, the medieval pinnacle of witchcraft belief came in the later Middle Ages after Pope Innocent VIII's papal bull, Summis Deserterantes Effectubis, causing local ecclesiastical authorities and inquisitors to work together, which heavily contributed to the increase in witch trials from the late 15th through 17th centuries. Medieval witchcraft remains an incredibly misunderstood topic by non-historians and historians alike. Whether real or perceived, witchcraft in the European Middle Ages deserves recognition because millions of medieval people believed rumors of such practices, while many remained convinced that they had witnessed its practice. The highly suspected, widespread acknowledgement of witchcraft and sorcery throughout the medieval period matters because it points to a need for further study of this subject in the early and high Middle Ages. Neglect of these eras in favor of the later Middle Ages has likely caused primary sources in European archives to remain undiscovered and thus unstudied. Such increased evidence would provide an even clearer picture of medieval witchcraft and thus would be invaluable. Furthermore, the study of witchcraft in the early and high Middle Ages would increase understanding of medieval theology, law, and the relationships between commoners, temporal authorities, and Roman Catholic Church prelates. An understanding of medieval witchcraft can also heighten knowledge of the most studied era of witchcraft and witch persecutions, the early modern period. Increased knowledge in medieval witchcraft amongst non-historians would help ease stereotypes and biases that the Middle Ages was an uneducated and superstitious period. Understanding that it was not an invention of the Roman Catholic Church would help eliminate anti-Catholic and anti-Christian biases that persist due to misinformation about this topic. Lastly, an acknowledgement of witchcraft in the Middle Ages honors those who believed in it, feared it, and studied it for centuries. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you also to Dr. Stefan, who stepped in for me while I was experiencing some technical difficulties, as such things happen, especially in the world of Zoom. So for those who don't know, my name is Rachael Smith, and I am the scheduled chair for this panel. I wanted to really quickly, before we get into Kate's presentation, just to say thank you for attending and for being here. If you have questions regarding the information that you are hearing about this morning, please feel free to ask your question in the Q&A box that's located at the bottom of your screen. And then at the end of the presentations, then I will ask those questions to the participants. If you have general questions that you would like to ask about Ball State's history program or any type of technical issue on your end that I may or may not be able to help with, you could also throw those into the chat. When it comes to our panelists, I just want to say that they have a wide array of expertise and knowledge, and are learning a great deal, especially in the era of witchcraft and demonology. And so since I missed Katrina's introduction, I want to quickly give you her biography. She is a senior English and history major at Hanover College with a minor in medieval Renaissance studies. She is a junior editor for the Hanover Historical Review and the Hanover Archives and Special Collections worker. She is also a Hanover College resident assistant. She plans to attend graduate school to earn her PhD with a specialization in medieval history in the near future. And based on what I have just heard, there is no doubt that she's most certainly going to be successful. The next presenter that we have coming up is Caitlin Smith. She will discuss which came first, an exploration of the chronology of witchcraft characteristics and the implications thereafter. She expects to graduate in May of 2021 with a BS in secondary social studies education and a concentration in economics. She is currently student teaching at Anderson High School and plans to teach after graduation. And eventually her goal is to return to get an MA in European history and medieval studies. So Caitlin, if you are ready, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. The witch stereotype is one that we know well. It shows up in fairy tales, children's books, movies, and novels about magical worlds far away. But how do we see the witch, and why do we see them that way? It's no secret that we have an image in our minds when we think of a witch. In this exploration, I discuss the implications of the characteristics of witches and dare to argue that the woman came first, not the witch. I will argue that the undesirable women and their unbecoming characteristics and actions were the basis for the witch archetype. Looking specifically at witch trials in New England, we can see that the characteristics of the witch are closely related to sexism and prejudices against undesirable others. Male and female witches were treated very differently. Looking at other parts of the world, it is clear that New England is not an unusual case. In a global context, the New England crises were not alone in their condemnation of undesirable women, and in many instances were upset about similar things around the world. Analyzing data and information from several primary and secondary sources, I construct a look at why women are statistically more accused of witchcraft than men. Looking at witch hunting manuals and accounts from those in the area of the study at the time, it becomes clear what's going on, that no one is actually really that worried about witchcraft. They're more worried about women falling from their predetermined place in society. Women are hungry for power, women want independence from men, women want respect. All undesirable characteristics for the 1600s, and they're not the only ones. Looking at the data specifically, there's a large amount of quantitative data here. That's hard numbers that show how disproportionately women were accused, tried, convicted, and executed for witchcraft. Specifically looking at North America and New England witch trials, detailed records are kept. The data shows overwhelmingly that women were more involved in all 4 sections of the witch hunting process: accusation, trial, conviction, and execution. The numbers during the outbreaks tell an even stronger story. In totality, 344 persons were accused between 1620 and 1725. And of 342 who were identified by sex, 267 were female. That's 78%. Finally, looking at the sex of witches divided by individual outbreak areas in New England, the results are similar. These data points show without a doubt that even in those separate communities in New England, women are statistically more accused than men. They are also persecuted to the fullest extent possible. With the exception, of Fairfield, there was no one where no one was executed. The ratio is nearly 3-to-1 for women being executed to men. New England isn't far from the context of the rest of the world. In Germany, witches are almost always women until the very end of the hunts, when men took the lead. In the beginning, women were anywhere from 70% to 100% of those accused and executed for witchcraft. Toward the end, they fell to nearly 20%. Other trends suggested that children were more likely to be witches, and even of those, 42% were female. While this work doesn't look heavily at the accusation of children, it is more important to note that the suspicion of women is not unique to adults. Young girls were suspected at a higher rate as well. Looking at men and women, it's an important aspect of this puzzle, as how they were treated differently when accused of witchcraft. This is significant because some counter-arguments focus on the data points of men, that when looking at accounts from men and women who were accused and confessed, we find staggering double standards for men and women. It's important to understand that these people are people who have confessed to witchcraft. They've said that they've made a deal with Satan, or they've learned in some way. They've confessed to practicing witchcraft, intending to harm others, or at very least have tried to harm others. Rationally, the assumption would be that those persons would be treated similarly, having confessed to their transgressions. However, the truth is drastically different. Women who confessed to witchcraft were generally taken fairly seriously and were usually executed according to the biblical injunction, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Men, however, were whipped for telling lies. In fact, several men were let go because their confessions didn't line up with the truth. If a man and woman both confessed, it seems that a man would be punished for telling lies, while a woman would be believed and taken off to her punishment. The mere idea of a man behaving in such a way and breaking that stereotype of women being deviant and being witches is just too far from their reality. Men would not be punished nearly as badly for as their female counterparts. For example, an account of Eunice Cole was accused 3 different times in Boston between 1645 and 1680. She was tried for a few things, including slanderous speech, which was brought up in her witchcraft trial. She had made threats to neighbors that had come true, and she said that she was to have essentially a mark on her body that connected her to evil and to witchcraft. Cole was eventually convicted and sentenced to a punishment that was twofold. Several people pleaded for her release, and she eventually was let go and died in her own bed. There are other accounts that align with the data sets from other areas in New England. Puritan ideas of good women pushed women who may have not truly believed that they were participating in witchcraft to confess to deals with the devil. Their confessing really shored up the community's belief in their religion. Women knew that in some cases those who confessed would be forgiven and let go, or at least saved from execution. By saying that they were in league with the devil, demons, or were influenced in some way by an outside force, proved to their community that, first, the devil and his associates were real and working in the area, and 2, that good Puritan women would confess their transgressions and face punishment with honor. Goody Cole's story fits with the narrative of other areas in the world. In her case, while in line with other areas of New England, she is also in line with other areas of the world. In Germany, for example, during the 30 Years' War, there were several witch trials popping up. In 1643, just 2 years prior to one of Goody Cole's accusations, the Bavarian army had suffered many losses. By this time, women had outnumbered the men in the army camps. And after being asked several times to conduct witch trials, the trials came to fruition and the wives of soldiers were the first to be put under the hunter's microscope. Several women were killed for being witches. The argument here is that these women were undesirable others in this camp. Perhaps their morality or behavior was not seen as a problem, but in the late 1600s, when the army had more women with them than soldiers, resources must have been scarce. It would be a desired outcome that the excess women were removed from the camp, so the soldiers can make better use of those resources that they have. Additionally, if the army had suffered heavy losses, it is not unreasonable to come to the conclusion that some of the women could have been widows of the fallen soldiers in the army, and that would explain why women were outnumbering those men. If we're looking at prejudices and sexism, looking at characteristics of witches, as we discussed earlier, it is clear that there are some questionable at best links made between witches and women. These connections between witches and their likelihood to be female are not based on a strong foundation of fact and science. It's based on sexism and sexist assumptions of female behavior, character, values, and morals. The characteristics introduced earlier in this work, which is being older, being female, evil, dark, powerful, or sexually free and deviant, are ones that are clearly connected to sexism and prejudices. Older single women were singled out. Recalling back to the hag in medieval folklore, she transforms into a young maiden, showing that maidenhood is a desirable time for women. Once again, there's quantitative data from New England. If we look at the ages of those accused, it is clear that women over the age of 40 are accused at a higher rate. The logical jump here is that this data is that there are less women alive over the age of 60. It makes sense that older women are accused, but it also makes sense that as women are getting older, there are less of them around to be accused, and therefore it skews the numbers a little bit. Women over the age of 60 were accused, and I would suggest that if there were a larger quantity of women over 60 in those communities, that the number would be higher and rise accordingly. If there are any number of reasons for older women to live alone, and yet they are almost always included in those suspected of witchcraft in those communities. When looking at Carlson and her data, it compiles over the existence of these sexist claims and how they were to women how real they were to women, who fit the mold that they were looking for. In the Malleus Maleficarum, the main witch hunting manual, they never refer to the witch as anything other than female. Additionally, the authors of the Maleficarum believed that there is a conspiracy of wealthy, well-led witches with branches in every district, which intend to overthrow the prevailing order. The prevailing order here is Christianity or Catholicism, which are really the only game in town for both Europe and New England, as they're similar in their view of the treatment of witches or those suspected of witchcrafts. Christians subscribe to the idea that witches are practitioners of satanic religions, or they have at very least contact with demons and the devil. And therefore they have an inherent propensity to encourage the persecution of magicians. This brings us back to the characteristics of witches being evil or dark or associated with demons. They are seen to have connections with the devil, specifically in Puritan New England. Since Puritans' theology explains that they believe in predestination, one would expect that men and women were equally able to be pre-chosen for salvation or damnation. However, theology and practice religion often differ, and Puritans are no exception. Men are often repenting for their sins, while women are viewed themselves as destined for hell. This sense of learned helplessness in women contributes to the staggering number of women who confess to witchcraft and say that they had business or sexual relationships with the devil. Women are often viewed as the weaker sex. John Cotton, a member of the church, made a distinction between sinners and witches, saying that witches gave their bodies and souls to the devil, while sinners had only Satan occupy their souls. Additionally, it's clear that Cotton believed, or at least assumed, that witches were women because of their body joining their soul being occupied by the devil, and they had compounded their crime. Witches had surrendered not only to their soul, which is involuntary, but they had willingly and purposefully given their body to the devil to use, suggesting that she hadn't passively waited for Christ, but gone out of her way to seek the devil. Seeking out the devil to become a witch and act aggressively is a power grab, one that women were not used to having, but would actively seek. Being a witch and having that attention and power is not something that women could attain elsewhere. This is not unique to New England. Back to Germany, where women were also suggested to be the weaker sex, we're remembering the breakdown between the sexes accused in Germany. And despite those increases in men as panics continued, adult women were still singled out. This is because women were viewed as prone to diabolical contracts, not only because of their weaker minds, but because that they were lusty. And around the 16th century, women were viewed as lustful. This shows up in art and folklore of the time, in images of mermaids and sirens, showing their sexuality and vanity. Therefore, because of this accepted notion that undesirable women had sexual and lusty yearnings, it was more plausible for women to enter into these sexual business contracts with the devil through intercourse. The argument of the authors of the Maleficarum about networks of witches ties back to that characteristic, that they don't always work alone. The belief in the Sabbaths reinforces this idea of a network of witches. Indeed, as any sort of group activity involving magical rites is met with accusations of satanic witchcraft. This is interesting because it effectively makes it so that either women have to be social to network, so that those cannot be suspected equally. This is also interesting because it opens a range of women. It opens the range of women that can be suspected and accused, while also giving accusers that crucial veil of authority in making those claims. Accusers could argue that their accusations were founded on that women were either living oddly alone or suspicious for having a network of other women. Looking first at the idea of networks, we return to a quotation from Reverend Bernard at the time of the Salem crisis. Women are more talkative than men and less able to hide what they know from others, and consequently, they are more ready to be teachers of witchcraft to others, such as children or servants. This final characteristic I want to discuss is through the lens of sexism and the idea of power. Hereafter, power is its own section and motivation, but it links to the woman's likelihood to be accused. Reverend Bernard explains in his explanation of why women are more likely to be witches with this. Women are proud in their rule and would busily command whomever they could, and therefore the devil laboreth most to make them witches, because they, upon every light displeasure, will set him to work on which he desires. Above all, female or male witches were malicious spirits, impatient people, and ad for revenge. He's looking directly at Salem in his explanation, and the idea of happily commanding people contradicts the Puritan ideas of power and gender rules. Puritans are a patriarchal society, and it's clear that wanting power was a motivation for women to look for witchcraft and a motivation for hunters to look at women. The societies we're looking at knew that they denied women the power that they wanted and gave them a reason to look toward women to be otherwise powerless. This leads us to our lasting question. Is this really a concern over witchcraft or a concern based on other motives? Do we really believe that witch hunters were truly working against the evils of witchcraft? Some argue that witch hunters and cultures were created, and the cultures that created them were not really all that worried about eradicating witchcraft. Recall the discussion of Christianity and its unwavering hostility towards witchcraft. In the past, religious motives are considered main reasons for hysteria. If you look at the economics of witchcraft, wealth and power may have been a motive for the persecution of the unwanted members of a community. Wealth and power is not always in relation to monetary value. Wealth can mean control of resources. Power can mean power over community or individuals. And when someone, something, or some group challenges that wealth or power, it can be an easy scapegoat to use witchcraft as a reason to persecute those persons so that they leave the community. In New England, this can be interpreted as a non-price competition for power over the communities. In Europe, it can be seen as a non-price competition between Catholic and Protestant churches for religious market share. By leveraging popular belief in witchcraft and power to protect citizens from all evils of the devil, it's an example of the Bavarian army that was mentioned earlier. The witch trials seem to be clearly linked to the army's need to allocate their resources better. More women than soldiers suggest that perhaps since resources were low, soldiers were not being adequately fed, that it was easy to accuse these women of being witchcraft to remove them from the community. Additionally, accusations can be used against specific people and not by communities. In other ways, hate-filled accusations could be ways to remove the undesirable people from your own personal world. For example, traditionally tense familial relations could cause accusations to fly. In such relationships where hate could not be easily admitted, they might occasionally have disintegrated into wild name-calling, and which would result in examinations and trials. However, it is unlikely that a bad relationship with a mother-in-law would have caused pointed witch hunts at women. The characteristics and beliefs of witches are rooted in sexism and prejudices of the patriarchal societies that conducted the witch hunts. Counter arguments to my thesis are valid. However, they overlook the hard data and view things with too many qualifications. The reality of the witch hunt really slaps historians with a hard truth that sexist members of male-centered community will always prey on women. Thank you.
Excellent work. Thank you very much. It would seem that our third presenter, I'm not sure if there is a technology issue, but Aaron is not here to give his paper. And so I'm going to try to, as much as possible, sum up his paper. And this way, you guys can have some kind of ideas to what it was about. His paper topic was on Protestants protesting Catholic exorcisms. He went into his introduction describing in 1599 William Summers, a man who was found to be possessed by demons, and a man by the name of John Darrell, who was a practicing exorcist in England, was asked to evaluate and to check in basically on Mr. Summers. And Darrell just so happened to be a Puritan. As we probably well know, exorcisms are something that was created by and implemented by the Catholic Church. And so the fact that there were Puritans who were participating in exorcisms is a very interesting point of research. According to Mr. Larson's paper here, the unfortunate part is that, excuse me, that Summers was later found to have been faking his possession, and therefore then that Darrell himself was also a part of this, and that this seems to be kind of an ongoing issue during this time period as a way for the Catholic Church to kind of push forward these ideas of demon possession as a way in the middle of the Protestant Reformation, or even after the Protestant Reformation, as a way to get people to return back to the faith, as opposed to staying Protestant, that maybe they would return back to being Catholic, according to Aaron's paper. One of the things that he does point out here is that that some of these symptoms of demon possession could be actually actual illnesses, such as epilepsy or schizophrenia, even seizures. And so that oftentimes people with those conditions would be targeted for demon possession, an exorcism for demon possession. He goes on actually to discuss a woman by the name of Anne, and that she even lived in her physician's home for quite some time, who unfortunately also was noted to be committing a hoax, and that she and her father had conspired with a Catholic priest to force a possession and an exorcism among the people of England, and that the case became very well known. And it actually led King James I to do his own investigation into the validity of exorcisms within the Catholic Church. According to Aaron's paper, that there were doubts as to how believable public exorcisms really were. If they were successful, that many people believe that demons should have flown out of the body with, and be visible to the crowd, which never seemed to happen. More so, there would be someone who would just stand over and say, the demon's gone. And so there was not a lot of faith in the extraction of demons from the possessed. And so their skepticism of possessions and exorcism most definitely did occur. However, on the other side of that, a lot of them most definitely did believe. So the idea that these demons were never heard or seen was kind of a big problem for those who were observing these exorcisms. that the public displays actually led witnesses to become increasingly skeptical, more so than being convinced of demon possession. And a successful dispossession demonstrated the power of an exorcist to prove to the Protestants that Catholicism was needed and convince skepticism of God's power and glory. But who is to say what a successful exorcism is, except for the person who's completing the exorcism, right? And so it is believed that something that exists in the real world must have some type of a physical form, or that it must be corporeal. And many believed who wrote on the ideas of possession and exorcism used this as an argument against the practices of demon possession. And so one of the biggest fears of demonic possession is the idea that one cannot see a demon entering or leaving the body, or not at all, for that matter. And so these fears, of course, led people to reevaluate, to think about their religious practices. However, despite being heavily questioned in England, possession and exorcism continued to grow in popularity throughout the Tudor and Stuart era. The mission of the Catholic Church was to prove that England was heretical, and that it was a nation of heretics, and that the Catholic Church was the one true church, one of the marks of which was the power to perform miracles, such as expelling demons. People, mostly commoners, were always intrigued to see such miracles, as it showed God's power working right in front of them. So they did not really have an understanding of the procedures, or know of the events, that the events were fraudulent. They just wanted to see the power of religion in front of them. So we actually see, according to Aaron's paper, that the crowds alone drawn to these exorcisms point to a highly influential status that they held among all classes of society. Nonetheless, the onlookers would not just watch the procedures. The priests actually led crowds in the Lord's Prayer. The people participated, whether they were Catholic or Protestant. That this was not a case to show the effects of possession, but instead a way to gain converts, or to bring people back to the faith. And both possession and exorcism were an act of theater. They involved a recitation of a script that involved the onlookers. More people participated, then the better chance that the depossession would be a success. The exorcisms were not just a show, but also a way to get everyone involved in Catholicism. So according to Aaron's paper, he also says that it's not surprising to see the use of exorcism as propaganda, that it had been used before numerous times, that what was happening in England in the 16th and 17th centuries was highly unusual for such a Protestant-leaning country, but that many Catholics remained, but the majority of people during this particular time had become Protestant. And by 1603, there were many highly publicized exorcisms that were taking place. In Scotland, however, an almost solely Protestant country, there was not a possession trial until 1697. That was more than 100 years after the first trials that had crept up in England. As Catholicism was the leading ideology, possession and exorcism was used almost entirely to suppress Protestantism. He finishes his paper by saying that they did this through the utilization of propaganda, in their use of possession and exorcism, and that the power over these events grew so quick that the Protestant community was unsure of what to do. In England, no matter how hard the Protestants tried, it seems that there was no stopping the monster that the Catholic Church had created. So I am saddened that he is not here right now, because I would have really loved to have picked his brain on his paper and listened to the whole thing entirely. And I apologize for the really quick summary that I gave. But I think that it is important. It's important work. And I also think that there is one common theme that definitely emerges in these scholarly works, and that is the use of fear to derive a specific response, right, from individuals. So that response may be a return to a specific faith, such as the demon possession incidences, a solidification of faith, right, to solidify someone's religious preferences, or of course the expectations of female behavior, right, what women should and should not be doing. Witchcraft and demon possession have been an area of interest for historians in order to make sense of behaviors and actions of the past. And more specifically, I think that a lot of historians, and myself included, have always asked the question, where's the logic? Where's the reasoning? Why would people, one, believe? And then two, why did they behave the way in which they did? I also find that it's interesting, and kind of rounding this out with social media. I recently ran across a meme through social media that had stated, why were people so afraid of witches when they should have been afraid of those who were killing them, right? And the way that we look at history and the questions that we ask are so important, especially when looking at things such as witchcraft, religion, demonology. They're so important when we look at behaviors, especially. So this is an area, of course, which can still be discovered. It is by no means been fully explored. And even though numerous people have tackled witchcraft and people's reactions to it, as historians make connections to our current social climate, there's still much to be learned from witches of the past and the actions that were taken against them. These student scholars have done amazing work in these issues. And me personally, I really look forward to see what they're going to bring forth next. So I am going to open it up for questions. Excuse me. And we do have one question. Kate and Katrina, this person wants to know and says, I wonder if both presenters could say a bit more about how they came to work on medieval and early modern witchcraft. So what drove you to this area of study?
Is it okay if I go first? Okay. I think this is a really great question, and I was really inspired to study medieval witchcraft in particular because I took a wonderful class at Hanover College on the High and later Middle Ages. And while I was taking this course, I became really fascinated in doing research on witchcraft and exorcism because I'm really interested in Roman Catholic Church history. And I think that combined with the darker side of humanity, which is examined a lot in the medieval period and through the Roman Catholic Church, I became really fascinated in studying medieval witchcraft. But while I was doing this, at first I noticed that most of the sources I was coming up with were the Malleus Maleficarium, the Summus Desiderantes Effectibus, and they were all from the later medieval period. And it really made me wonder, well, when did witchcraft emerge? Did it only emerge in the later Middle Ages? Was there not any kind of process that got us there, which really inspired me to examine it in the high and early medieval period?
Right on, Kate.
I got into this originally last year. I took a class on medieval women with Dr. Bosworth here at Ball State. And I wrote a paper that I presented last year about the characteristics of good medieval women and this idea of what do we like and what do we not like and how do we represent that. And then taking a subsequent class with Dr. Alves here on witchcraft this past fall semester. This was my final paper for him, and it was really just a general interest in looking at that idea even further of what we like and what we don't like, and how we treat people of each side, and how we can generally make decisions about large groups of people rather carelessly based on those things. So that's how I did this.
Right on, great answers. As for the other attendees, if you have any questions, you can put them into the Q&A. But I also have a couple of questions because I'm me and this is my thing. So I love this stuff. And so I would like to ask first, Kate, you had mentioned the children accusations. One of the things that I have always found in my research is that women were considered adults at the age of 18, whereas males were considered adults at the age of 21. And so I'm curious because women could be tried and then executed, right? Because they were considered an adult at 18 years old, whereas men were not. And so with these children accusations and I'm not sure, were there executions and were those children under the age of 18, or are we considering children to be even males under the age of 21?
So the children accusation was in Germany later, so earlier 1600s or so, and the children were between like 3 and 7. When they had done the kind of mock-up of the raw numbers, they had charts with each age group, and so they were looking at infants. There were a couple of like babies that were accused, that kind of goes with that changeling idea, but then there were girls between 3 and 7. There were boys between 3 and 7, going up to, I believe, like 12 was when the numbers started to merge more towards like the adult numbers, and having of course statistically more women and more young girls than young boys and men, but the numbers started to kind of go back to what we saw in Salem and what we see in New England. But then later, of course, in the German witch trials, it turned more towards men. And so as it starts with young girls and women, and as it moves forward, it goes more towards men towards the end. But there's still a good 20% of women that were accused.
Wow, babies. And I have to say, this absolutely fascinates me. And anybody who takes this on, I am so down to read whatever, because me personally, it never crossed my mind to look into children and to the effects, on children. And I think that this is definitely an area of study that needs to be studied further, that it needs to be further developed. And so I appreciate you throwing that into your paper. It's amazing. What do you guys think, both of you? What do you think as far as what can we take away from this time period, and how can we apply it to today? As historians, it's kind of what we do, right? We try to learn from history. We try not to make the same mistakes. So what do we need to really focus on and look at when we look at these witchcraft accusations, excuse me, and how do we need to take this information and apply it to our present day circumstances? Either one of you can go ahead and go first.
I'll go. So something that I think is really interesting is the study of fear, and the fear of commoners and the reaction of those in power. I think it is really interesting that, especially in the Canon Episcopae, we see Roman Catholic Church authorities reacting to the commonly held belief, it seems, that witchcraft is real. And these Roman Catholic Church leaders are saying, no, that couldn't be real, or if it is real, it's a trick by Satan. And I think that really speaks to the power of, or it speaks to those in power reacting to those below them. Especially today, we're struggling so much with how our politicians are handling the epidemic and how they're handling our fear and the economy and all of these different things that are really affecting the common people. And then we see politicians really struggle with how to react to that. They can't figure out our stimulus checks and things like that. And so I think it really speaks to the power that is held in society and how a lot of times commoners are ignored. And it's not until those in power finally accept something, that there is a big reaction to it.
I think that what we can learn from my research specifically is that as a whole, for like a long period of time, women are not being believed, and women are being treated very differently. And it's like kind of beating a dead horse at this point that we need like some equality out here. But I think it's important, and I think that we can look back at all of these times that women are being accused or being treated differently for any number of things, and then apply it to right now, where we have the movements with sexual assaults, and saying that we don't believe women, and that we don't believe these accounts, having different punishments for men and women when, you know, men are found guilty for things and getting, you know, very small punishments in comparison. So I think that what we can learn from my research is just that we need to look at how we treat other people, and look at how we view other people, even if we don't necessarily like them or what they stand for or whatever, and treat them with kindness and equality.
Great answers. I know that, like I said, as historians, we're always looking for those connections and making those connections from our past to our present. And I always find it interesting that we often really focus on the fact that we don't want to make the same mistakes. And so, but at the same time, we see, especially historians, we see people around us who have not paid attention to history, right? Did not learn from the principal players of the past and what had happened. And so we do see people around us, excuse me, making those mistakes. So it is interesting when we can go back and we can learn from history. We can see how to either to do or not to do, how to behave or not to behave, how to treat people, how not to treat people. So if there are any more questions, the Q&A box is open for questions. And I don't know, Dr. Stefan, if he wanted to add anything, but if there are no further questions, and I am so sorry that Aaron could not be here with us today, then I will go ahead and close this panel. I appreciate both of you for attending and presenting. Your papers were absolutely fantastic. I also appreciate all of the attendees who came to listen and to participate, and thank you for the questions. Please check out all of the other panels that are, perhaps maybe Aaron got confused on the time zone. Good call. Unfortunately, excuse me. Unfortunately, there was an email that went out that said to make sure, but I also, I believe he's from Ohio State. And so I think that they're on the same time zone, but hopefully we'll find out from Aaron what happened, because I still have so many questions for his paper. And I really would like to know more about the demon possession and the exorcism front, as someone who is a huge fan of the original Exorcist film. So, and not just, you know, just for film's sake, but the fact that, you know, this is a firmly held belief by many that exorcism is most definitely real, and something that people should be, that people need to participate in if they are possessed. But yes, thank you all for attending, and please continue to check out the program, watch any of the other presentations that are going on. The student presentations are amazing, papers are amazing. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day.